consider legislation dealing with the Industrial Bank Holding Company Act, which was filed by myself and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services, dealing from Ohio, Mr. Gilmore. It deals with the question of whether or not the entity known as the Industrial Loan Corporation ought to be expanded or maintained at its current level. I begin by saying that there's been a debate about the ILCs. It does seem to me that those who profess to be strong supporters of the Industrial Loan Corporation form ought to be the ones initiating legislation. That is, if you genuinely believe that the ILCs are an important financial institution, how does anyone justify limiting them so that only 6 states can charter them? I know of no other generally approved entity which can only be chartered by 6 states. So I understand people who think ILCs are a wonderful thing and would therefore like to have them freely chartered. I understand those of us who think that we should restrict them. It is hard for me to understand a rational argument for the status quo, in which we have this entity which exists in only a few states. Why would anyone do that? Let me put it this way. It is inconceivable to me that anyone starting from scratch in a situation would say, okay, here's a nice institution we ought to have. We're going to call it an Industrial Loan Corporation, and let's pick 6 states that are allowed to charter it. I don't know how you would pick the 6 states. I assume a dartboard would be an essential part of that decision-making process. In other words, we have what is the result of a historical accident, and it seems we go one way or the other. There are also people who argue that we've, after all, had the ILCs for this considerable period and there has not been any problem. Well, those of us who support this legislation generally agree to that, because we are trying to preserve the status quo. Nothing that is being proposed would undo the current situation with regard to ILCs that exist. Indeed, we had previously been told by the state of Utah where they are important, and I note the presence of our colleague from Utah, a former member of this committee, whose disagreement with us was sufficiently strong to cause him to return, and he has been a very able advocate of the interests of his state. But I do note that the last information we had was that over 90% of the ILC assets in the state of Utah would be unaffected by our legislation because they would meet the test of 85% financial. But I do return to the point that we have an anomaly. And I can understand going forward, I can understand going backward. I do not see how anyone can justify in public policy staying where we are. Now, what we find is, and people have said, why are you dealing with this now? They have not caused problems. But what we are confronted with is people who have decided significantly to expand this entity, including major commercial organizations. Again, I understand the argument from those who say that the distinction between commercial and banking activities is an artificial one, that it should fall. But if you believe that, then where's the language to repeal the restriction? Again, why this halfway, to put it in a way that will meet the rules of propriety, approach to a situation? What, again, is the justification for maintaining the general principle of a separation between banking and commerce and allowing this one narrow exception? I hope, will go forward. We are trying, again, not to disturb status quo. We have had some conversations with a kind of a border area involving securities, border in the sense these are financial institutions, and we have been working and having conversations, and I want to thank Chairwoman Baer is here, and she has on this, as in so many issues, other issues, been extremely helpful. And we are trying to work out the various regulatory approaches that should go forward. And I do want to say that this has been one of the rare occasions in my memory when the Federal Reserve has been very flexible. I hope that this is a pattern that we will see going forward. But I think we have a very reasonable approach in the legislation. Obviously, we are prepared to listen. And with that, I will recognize the ranking member.